the Edison phonograph works, West Orange, New Jersey. By that time, Edison was in West Orange. The phonograph, though, the first phonograph, he had invented in 1877 in Menlo Park, New Jersey. The kind of precursor technology to the phonograph was an instrument called the Phone Autograft, which was designed in Paris, France in the 1850s. It allowed a person to make a recording in the sense that it drew a visualization of a sound wave. So the advancement with the phonograph, Edison's phonograph, was that you could not only make a recording and see the wave, but you could, with the phonograph, you could replay the recording. And the first phonograph followed right on the heels of the first telephone. The telephone was invented, was patented in 1876, and then the phonograph just less than a year later in 1877. And both telephone and phonograph developed, both Bell and Edison were working to improve telegraph technology. So they both developed telegraph technology. So first phonograph, 1877. These are a bit into the history of the machine. So these are about 30 years later. So quite a bit of development has already happened by the time that these machines are made. And this era, it's been called the era of the big three, meaning Edison, Victor, and Columbia were the three major companies making phonographs and sound recordings. And these are about 1909, and that's about the time when things were really changing quickly. Through the 1890s, Edison and Columbia grew out of the Bell patents on phonograph. Edison and Columbia were, at least in the U.S., were more dominant in the market cylinder format. Berliner patented the disc in 1888, right around the time when the wax cylinder was also introduced, but it took Berliner a bit more time to get the business really off the ground. So the disc and the cylinder were competing through the 1890s, through the century, and this is about the time where the disc format was overtaking the cylinder format. Like in between about 1906 and 1912 is when that changeover happens. What we're going to do today is we're going to make a recording and then play it back. And you could do it. These are actually home machines. They're not studio machines. The studio machines, Edison didn't sell his studio machines. It was all in-house operation, from recording studio to delivering the finished product records to the record shops across the country. So the studio machines are really, really rare, and very few of them survive. The ones that we do have a few in the collection, but we don't use them because anytime you use a phonograph, in order to keep it working, you have to maintain it, which really means making changes to it. So the few studio machines that survive, we just keep intact as study objects. But the home machines were most ordinarily used for playback, but if you bought extra accessory attachments, you could make your own cylinders at home. And there were hobbyist cylinder recordists in that era. So this is kind of the sound quality of a home recording. If this were a studio recording, it would be a bit better. Just the overall, you'd get less wavery sound, and it'd be probably louder and clearer. But we're doing our best with the home machines. So I have two machines. This one is set up for recording. This one is set up for playback. The main distinction, they're very similar machines. This was the model was Edison home phonograph. This is an Edison fireside phonograph. But the main difference, recording versus playback, is the point, the tip, or the stylus that touches down on the record, on the cylinder. This is one of the cylinders. Machines are original. These are new. They're replica. There's a couple of collectors who have developed looked at the clues, the laboratory notebooks looking for clues about the formula, and have developed their own formulas. And they make them in small quantities for collectors. I'll pass this around just so you can see what it looks like. This is a test recording we made earlier. The best way to, it is fragile. If you drop it, it'll break. That's not a big deal because it's not a historic cylinder. But the best way to handle it is, the safest way to handle it is just not to take it fully out of the can. You know, if you want to look at just, the best way is 2 fingers in the center and then slide it out and not take it completely out. And then you can see, it's mostly blank because we just did, it was just a couple tests. So you see the blank on one, just blank, flat on one end, you'll see the spiral groove on the other end. I'll pass that around. And we intentionally didn't do, the studio process in the acoustic era was a lot of trial and error. There are no VU meters, there are no level meters. Today, if you set up a microphone and recording machine, the way you do the test to get the levels is they play into the mics before you actually press record, and you see level meters telling you how loud the signal is. We don't have that here, so the way you do it is you make a recording. Just the first recording will be based on just our best guess of what will probably work. We're going to do a short, maybe 20 seconds test, and then stop, and then we will put it on the record onto the playback machine and listen, and that's our test. And what we'll be listening for is the balance and the loudness. With acoustic recording, there's kind of a window, a fairly small window you're shooting for, or a floor and a ceiling. On the quiet end is the surface noise, just the friction scratch of the stylus traveling across the record. It's like a kind of sound. On the ceiling end is distortion, and that means you're pushing the machine too hard. So you're shooting for that in-between point, and the goal is to get the music as far above the surface noise as you can without the really harsh distortion that you get when it gets too loud. And I'll give you just a quick description of kind of the physics of what's going on here. Anytime you make a sound in the room, what's happening is you're disturbing the air molecules. And it's not like a gush of air that's rushing down the horn. It's more delicate than that. It's compressions and rarefactions of air molecules bouncing into one another and pushing each other. So as the musicians will play, they're disturbing the air molecules. Some of them, they're focusing their instruments directly into the center of the horn. So some of the air molecules will propagate through the air into the horn. And you see the horn get smaller and smaller and smaller as it's kind of shape. So by the end, there's much less space, which increases the air pressure that is hitting against here. Inside this is what Edison called a diaphragm. It's kind of like a little drum head. Now, if you've ever been in a room, an orchestra room with timpani, anytime that someone stomps the floor, you hear the timpani rumble. That's kind of how this works. The air molecules are hitting against the diaphragm. That gets the diaphragm shaking like this up and down, back and forth. The distortion point happens when there's so much air pressure that pushes the diaphragm farther than it can physically go, and just stops at that point and bounces back. And so you get, and if you look at the wave under a microscope, you get like a clip, and that's the distortion.
Excuse me, can you show, you were doing something there with the diaphragm, we couldn't see.
Oh, okay. All right.
And
yeah, basically,
oh, I see. Okay.
see that? That's the movement. So the diaphragm shaking, attached to the back end of the diaphragm is the stylus. On the recording head, it's literally a knife. You've heard the term cut a record, right? That term comes from the era of literally cutting a record. So as as the air molecules are pushing the diaphragm and the knife into the record, up and down, that's cutting an up and down wave. And so you have shavings. The term they used historically was swarf. And I once said that to an Englishman, and he told me, in England, that's kind of an old slang for just like crud or crap. So my job will be, I have this little airbag. I used to blow up, but that looks kind of ridiculous, so I switched to this airbag. My job is to just gently, not too hard, because if I do it too hard, you start to hear it in the recording. But I need to get the swarf out of the way, because what can happen, and maybe what will happen, sometimes it just happens, is a little piece of wax will get stuck in the knife, under the knife, and that creates a dropout. Yeah.
I've got a question. We know from interviewing recording artists, early recording artists, that at the disc companies, they would heat the wax blank before recording.
Yeah.
Did Edison do the same thing?
I believe so. A lot of this was very proprietary. There were trade secrets. So most of what we know, really, they intentionally didn't document the studio practice. Very few photos, very little written documentation. So most of what we know just comes from the machines that survive. And I did, as you said, I have these are the blanks in here. To prepare last week, I shaved these blanks smooth using what's called an Edison shaving machine, which is basically like a lathe with a flat knife, which shaves a smooth surface. And that really, doing all this, that's like the most difficult thing, is maintaining the shaving machine. Because the problem I'm starting to run into now is my knife is starting to wear. So I need to figure out a way to get a new knife, a shaver knife for the shaver. Yeah, so they're called wax cylinders, or this type was called brown wax. Literally speaking, though, it's more like a soap making process. The more technical term that Edison would use was, he'd call it metallic soap. Let's see. So I have the blanks in this box here under a heat lamp, and I have a little thermometer in here. I've had problems. We do this oftentimes in June outdoors, and I've had one year I had a box of blanks under a lamp outside in June. It's a really hot day, and it was just too hot. And it started to deform the surface. So when I try to get it, just about like heat lamp range. This is reading at about 85 Fahrenheit. So I have a lamp on the blanks, a lamp on the recording machine, because we want the surface to be soft so it can cut. But I do not have a lamp on the playback, because for playback it's more advantageous to have the surface be harder. All right, so we did, historically they would have started a brown wax cylinder with what was called an announcement. That was a person, there's no real practical way to, at least with brown wax, to label the cylinders. So what they would do is, rather than a written label, a record label, start at the beginning, start of the recording, they would state the title of the piece and the performer. And just to kind of prepare, we practiced that, but we haven't yet gotten levels for the instruments, because that's kind of part of the demonstration. It's kind of part of what makes it interesting. So we're going to start with just a few tests, and so we'll do one or two or three short tests, like 20 seconds. You might want to, I don't know if you want to pick like a loud passage, might be helpful, or whatever is practical, or just start at the top if that's easy. Okay, and so we'll play. Each cylinder holds. These are slightly longer than the historic size, which gives us a little extra time. So these will hold about 2 minutes, 45 seconds. But just to start, we'll do about a 20-second passage, just kind of best guess of what will probably work best. And then we'll listen back, and we'll be thinking about balance of the instruments, or how they're, today might call them mixing the instruments, which instrument might need to be louder or softer, and then overall level. Are we above the up above the surface noise enough for the music to be clear, but not so much that you get the really harsh distortion. There's always going to be a certain amount of distortion just because of the limitations of the time, but you'll hear it when you hit that peak. It's really harsh, so we'll know it when we hear it. All right.
More of an art than a science, in a way.
Yeah. All right. And you're going to do the announcement? Well, first we'll do the test. All right. Okay. Let me give this a crank. You've heard the term crank it up? What that meant for the phonograph was not really turn up the volume, but it meant you're tightening up the spring. This is run by a spring motor. They call it a clockwork motor, because it's like an old clock where you wind up the spring on the inside, and that's what turns the record. So I've tightened up the spring, and I'm releasing the spring, and now we'll start our test. Kind of the cue for the musicians is especially when you're right in front of the horn, you can hear the knife touch down. You hear the surface noise, just like a. So you want to give it once you hear that, you give it like about a second just to kind of settle in. The cutting stylus is round. If you look at it under a microscope, it kind of looks like an ice cream scoop. So when it cuts around the groove.
Is it a diamond?
On these machines, it's a sapphire.
Okay.
So I'm just clearing the excess wax out of the way so I use this. And for playback, the stylus is not a knife. It is round though. It's a polished ball of the same diameter as the knife. So what's happening on playback is rather than cutting, the polished ball, playback stylus, sits down in the groove, and rather than cutting the groove, it rides the groove up and down. Like that machine, there's a diaphragm. So the stylus riding up and down very quickly gets the diaphragm shaking, and that disturbs the air molecules down here. And then the horn, for playback, the airflow is going this way, so the horn acts like a megaphone, like an acoustic amplifier, sort of. Okay. Yeah, if you could help me think about which instrument might need to be louder or quieter. This was a nice touchdown. the overall loudness was pretty good. You could move in a slight amount, maybe a few inches. I think
the what were your euphonium was probably a little on the loud side.
Okay, so maybe the two of you moved in like 4 or 6 inches or so. I don't think you probably don't need to move back, but if they move in a little bit.
Okay.
So let's try it again. And that was pretty good. Maybe we might not only need 2 tests. Horns are the easiest instruments to record. We recorded a string quartet recently, last week, at the laboratory, and I had a really difficult time.
I said it was the Chronos Quartet
Yeah.
tonight.
Yeah.
Their first cylinder was good.
The difficulty with violin is it's not a direct sound. Like the horns are very directional. You can tell if a horn player goes like this. But violin, the sound isn't really going directly from the instruments to you, to the listener. Sound's going out in all directions. So the violin, you're hearing not so much directly from the instruments, you're hearing the ceiling, you're hearing the walls, you're hearing the floor. So there's just not a lot of sound pressure. Plus, they're doing this. So with 4 stringed instruments, you just can't get them to be close together. You can't do it. It's easier with horns. And then music standards were difficult.
So we could mention that when we talked to violinists who recorded, they had to get the violin right into the horn, and their biggest problem was hitting the bow into the horn.
Oh,
Because
yeah,
it was
yeah.
that close.
Oh,
They
yeah.
had to get that close in order to register anything. I suspect that the quartet, like the Flumzala, you might have had to have 4 separate horns going into one.
Could be, yeah.
Yeah, with each one getting really close to the horn.
Yeah.
I've seen they have one of the horned violins here. Like, what do they call that? The
Right.
Yeah.
Specifically
Yeah.
for this problem.
Eugene Normandy said he made his violin recordings with a Stroh violin.
And a lot of times I've heard that the record companies would kind of not make it public knowledge that they were using Stroh violins. So that makes it difficult for us today to know. But you mentioned about the violinist needing to get right up like this. People often ask about the shape of the horns. I used to record, before I had this horn, this is a machine's original, but this is a new horn. The studio horns that survive in the few photos of recording studios, you always see straight horns. You don't see, like, on the home phonographs, it's more often flared bell. So I've often wondered why that? What's the reason for that? And I think at least one reason was that very problem. I once tried recording a violinist with a flared horn, and it's just that the flare got in the way.
Did they ever try putting the whole business up on a pedestal and have the horn pointing
That's
down?
I'd like to do that. I need a certain type of attachment. I need like an elbow tube,
different,
because it doesn't work too well. This is just like a rubber tube, but I need like a metal elbow to allow me to do that. And then I think another reason for the difference flare no flare is when the sound pressure is going this way, one thing that can happen is if you have something like this, the sound can bounce back. So I think the no flare reduces that problem of reflecting the sound back.
Now, I should mention, in terms of Lionel Mapleson at the Metropolitan Opera, it was a home machine I think that he used as well, but it was up in the rafters.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
It's amazing that he got what he got.
Yeah, it is amazing.
So do they have multiple horns going to one gadgets?
From what you can tell in the photos, and they're just few photos, is it seemed like early on, well, initially, they would usually use just one horn per machine, but the difficulty in the beginning was duplication, getting lots and lots of copies from a master. So what they would do to compensate for that is they would make multiple masters at once. So they might set up eight or more machines and have the musicians play into 8 machines, so you have 8 horns. So the really early photos, you see multiple horns, but it's multiple masters. And then And then, but later on, by like late teens, early 20s, where it's still acoustical, you start seeing, by that time they developed a really economical molding process, so duplication was less difficult. But you do start seeing multiple horns to one master. And I've tried that a little bit. This guy, there's a horn instrument repairer in New Jersey who made this for me. He also made this, so I can use this to record with two horns. It's kind of difficult because this is moving here, this is moving here, this is moving here. It kind of becomes like a balance problem, and it also like puts more stress on the machine because it's sort of like pulling itself in two directions. So it basically, I've done it with two horns, and it can be helpful. Three horns would be that much more difficult. But
is there any reason that since we're on the topic of horn, that the difference between straight versus swan neck, does it seem to make any difference?
I think you don't really see academic papers on the mathematics of horn design until late teens and 20s. And Edison himself never learned advanced mathematics. So I think the horn designs in the acoustic era were mostly trial and error designs. And I think this particular design was mainly an aesthetic design, but also a compactness design, because if you had something like this in your living room, you'd always be knocking into it. This is more, it's upright, so it's out of the way.
Have you tried using electric, like direct drive motors to reduce any speed variability?
I haven't myself, just because the really early Edison wax cylinder machines were battery-driven electric motors, but those are really, really rare machines. So since they're so rare, we don't use them. These are more common, so it's.
But the speed variations are tolerable.
I would, well.
I did notice a little.
Yeah, you hear a lot of warble.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that is due to gearing. So so I assume that with the electric motor machines, that was probably less of an issue because there were less gears. So let's do one more test, and then we'll do our take.
And so I have to do this quickly because.
Okay, maybe let's just go to the take. You want to go to the take?
By the football game. Is anyone here going?
Let's just go to the take.
No, do the test. We'll do it. I'm just saying. Let's get them made.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
I think we're pretty good. I think let's go to the take. Okay.
Jerry, do all these people in this room have any effect on the recording quality?
Somewhat.
If you sneeze.
Turn off electronic devices.
The room does matter somewhat. There's a researcher we were kind of talking about this, and he was very skeptical that the room mattered at all on acoustic recordings, and he had heard that, which is true, the Edison studio, experimental laboratory studio in the late teens was padded with cow hair because Edison preferred a completely dead room sound. And this researcher was like, well, why was that even necessary? We talked about it, but the only way I could convince him that the room sound matters was I happened to have done a recording with a brass quartet in an actual concert hall. And in a concert hall, the room sound is dramatic, and you could hear that on the cylinder. You could hear that reverberation. So that convinced him that room sound does matter. Can be heard. Okay, so we're going for a take. And we timed it earlier at about 2 minutes, 20 seconds, so it should be good. This type of brown wax holds about 2 minutes, 40 seconds.
Images from 3 sketches for 3 brass by Ferre, played by the Syracuse University Brass Trio.
Great. It looks good. And I could, as I was blowing the swarf out of the way, there's definitely a big difference when they're playing loudly. A lot more wax is flying off, and the quiet passages was a lot less wax.
Might mention that B.H. Hagen, the music critic, told us that Carl Muck, when he did the Boston Symphony recordings, actually had a huge horn-like structure that has rubber shelves for musicians to sit in, so that all the sound would go into one direction. Sure. Not true. Yeah, not true.
All right. Here we go.
Images from 3 sketches for 3 brass by Ferre, played by the Syracuse University Brass Trio.
Yeah, so the really loud passages were somewhat distorted, but technically, on a technical level, that was pretty good, because you don't want to get, then the low, if we move them back, the piano passages, the quiet passages would be too quiet. So I think that's good. I think that's our take. Cool. Okay. 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 Great.
Can we mention one other thing? And that is that when powerful singers used to do it, they had to train them to step back and forth. Lots of laymen said it was like dancing the whole time, going back and forth to the horn, because otherwise it would distort it. Yeah, choreograph, yeah.
Jerry, what about drums?
What's that?
Drums, would you be,
Drums?
would you record drums in?
There are certain instruments where they figured out early on just didn't work very well. One of the earliest recordings we have, 1888, there's a really prominent snare drum and a booming bass drum, but it's very distorted sounding. And pretty much from that point on, you don't hear snare drums in the acoustic era.
I think a lot of early American Aboriginal music, when it was recorded, they dispensed with the drums, so you get a kind of distorted sense of what the music was about.
Yeah.
It was always voiced.
So,
I think that was absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
Let's thank Jerry Fabris and